The dust settled on the road as Zachary Thompson reined in his horse at the edge of Harper's Creek, his heart hammering against his ribs like a wild mustang. The fields where they had once run as children stretched before him, golden wheat swaying in the late afternoon breeze, unchanged despite the 12 long years of his absence. Beyond those fields stood the Miller farmhouse, and somewhere inside was Hannah Miller, the girl who had stolen his heart when they were barely tall enough to reach the stirrups on a saddle. It was 1874, and the West had changed. So had Zachary. The boyish frame that had once raced through these fields had hardened into the weathered build of a man who'd seen the wilder parts of the frontier. His once smooth face now bore a short beard that couldn't quite hide the scar running along his jawline, a souvenir from a disagreement in a Dodge City saloon 3 winters ago. He dismounted, giving his palomino, Sundance, a gentle pat on the neck. "We're here, old friend," he murmured. "Don't know if that's a good thing yet." The last rays of sunlight caught on something metallic pinned to his vest, a silver star. Marshal Zachary Thompson had made something of himself in the years away from Harper's Creek. It had taken blood and sacrifice, but he'd carved out a reputation as a fair but firm lawman. Now, with a job offer to become the sheriff of Green River, a growing town 50 miles west, he had come back for the one thing he couldn't leave behind again: Hannah. Zachary hadn't planned his return this way. He'd meant to ride straight to the Miller farm, knock on the door like a proper gentleman caller. Instead, he found himself drawn to this spot where memories lay thick as the summer pollen. This was where they had promised to meet that fateful night before everything fell apart. A twig snapped behind him, and Zachary's hand instinctively moved toward his holster. "I thought I might find you here," came a voice that stopped his heart. He turned slowly, and there she was. Hannah Miller, 28 years old now, stood at the edge of the field. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple bun, a few stubborn strands framing a face that had matured from pretty to beautiful. Her blue calico dress was practical, dusty at the hem from the walk, but her eyes, those hadn't changed. Still the color of a clear autumn sky, still seeing right through him as if he were made of glass. "Hannah," he said, her name feeling both familiar and foreign on his tongue. She didn't smile. "Word travels fast. Mrs. Patterson at the general store said she saw a marshal riding into town who looked an awful lot like Zachary Thompson. Surprised she remembered me. People remember trouble," Hannah replied, but there was no venom in her words, just truth. Zachary removed his hat, running a hand through hair that had grown a shade darker over the years. "I didn't come to cause any." "Then why did you come, Zach?" She took a step forward, stopping just out of arm's reach. Close enough that he could see the light freckles across her nose that summer always brought out, far enough that he couldn't mistake her caution for welcome. The question hung between them, heavy as the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. This wasn't how he'd rehearsed it during those long nights on the trail. He'd had a speech prepared, words carefully chosen and arranged. But standing here, looking at the woman who had haunted his dreams for over a decade, all those words scattered like leaves in the wind. So instead, he spoke the plain truth. "I came back to ask you to run away with me again, Hannah. Like we planned when we were young, only this time I won't leave without you." Her eyes widened slightly, the only indication that his words had landed. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Hannah's laugh was soft and disbelieving. 12 years, Zachary. 12 years without a word, and now you ride back into town expecting me to drop everything and go with you. The world doesn't work that way." "I know I don't deserve it," he said, taking a cautious step toward her. "I know I left you in a way that can't be easily forgiven, but I'm asking anyway. A distant rumble of thunder punctuated his words. The summer storm was moving in faster now, the air growing thick with electricity and unspoken feelings. "I'm engaged to be married, Zach." The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd known it was a possibility a woman like Hannah wouldn't have remained alone all these years, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that speculation never could. To whom? He managed, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Benjamin Foster. He owns the bank now." Her fingers twisted nervously in her skirt. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. Benjamin Foster." Zachary knew him or had known him. A bookish boy 2 years their senior who had always looked at Hannah with undisguised admiration. The son of the wealthiest man in Harper's Creek. A respectable match by anyone's standards. "You love him?" The question was unfair, and Zachary knew it even as the words left his mouth. Hannah's expression hardened. "That's not a question you have the right to ask anymore." She was right, of course. He'd surrendered that right the night he rode away without her, leaving nothing but a hastily scribbled note explaining that he couldn't take her with him into the dangerous life he was choosing. That he loved her too much to watch her wither away in dusty frontier towns while he hunted men who killed for sport and pleasure. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the dry earth and raising the rich scent of summer soil. "We should get out of this weather," Hannah said, glancing at the darkening sky. Zachary nodded, though leaving this field felt like abandoning something precious all over again. "Can I walk you home?" Her hesitation was brief but noticeable. "That wouldn't be proper given my engagement." "Since when have you cared about proper, Hannah Miller?" The ghost of a smile played at his lips. "As I recall, you were the one who suggested we swim in Peterson's pond in our underthings when we were 14. A reluctant smile tugged at her mouth. "And you were so scandalized you couldn't look me in the eye for a week afterward." For a moment, they were children again, standing in the sunshine of a simpler time. Then Hannah's smile faded, and she was once more the woman who had learned to live without him. "My parents' farm is on the way to town," she conceded. "You can walk me that far." They set off side by side, Zachary leading Sundance by the reins. The rain came down harder now, but neither suggested they quickened their pace. These precious minutes were all they had, and Zachary sensed that Hannah, too, was reluctant to see them end. "Tell me about your life," Hannah said after a while. "Mrs. Patterson said you're a marshal now." "I am. Started as a deputy in a little town called Bitter Springs, worked my way up. I've been offered the sheriff's position in Green River." He glanced at her profile, trying to gauge her reaction. "It's a good town, growing. They're building a schoolhouse." Hannah nodded but offered no comment on what he was clearly implying. "And you?" he asked. "What have these years been like for you?" "Quiet, mostly. I teach at the school now. Started 5 years ago when old Mr. Wilkins's eyes got too bad for him to see the chalkboard." She smiled fondly. "I love it. The children are wonderful." Zachary could picture it easily, Hannah surrounded by admiring students, patiently guiding them through their letters and numbers. She had always had a gentle way about her, even as a spirited girl who could outride most of the boys. "Your parents, they're well?" Hannah's expression clouded slightly. "Pa had a bad fall last winter. His leg never healed right. Ma takes care of him, but they've had to sell off some of the land. They can't work it anymore." The unspoken worry in her voice was clear. Benjamin Foster, with his bank and wealth, would be able to provide for her parents in ways that a wandering lawman might not. They crested a small hill, and the Miller farmhouse came into view below. It was smaller than Zachary remembered, the white paint graying with age, but the lantern light glowing in the windows gave it a warm, inviting appearance despite the rain. "This is far enough," Hannah said, stopping. I don't think it would be good for Pa to see you. His heart isn't what it used to be. Zachary nodded, understanding the meaning beneath her words. Jacob Miller had never forgiven him for nearly taking his daughter away, even before he'd abandoned her. "Will you meet me tomorrow?" he asked, the words rushing out before he could reconsider. "Just to talk. There's so much I need to explain." Hannah hesitated, raindrops clinging to her eyelashes like tears. "I don't know if that's wise, Zach. Please. 1 hour of your time, that's all I'm asking. Then if you tell me to go, I'll go." He swallowed hard. "And this time I won't come back." The weight of that promise hung between them, as heavy as the storm clouds overhead. "The old oak by the creek," she finally said. 10 o'clock. I have errands in town, so I can slip away without raising questions." Relief flooded through him. "Thank you." Hannah nodded, then turned to go. She had taken only a few steps when she paused and looked back over her shoulder. "Why now, Zach? After all this time, why come back now?" The rain plastered his hair to his forehead, running in rivulets down his face. "Because I finally became the man I thought you deserved. Only to realize that man would never have left you in the first place." Something flickered in her eyes, pain or remembrance. He couldn't tell. Then she turned and walked down the hill toward the house without another word, her figure gradually disappearing into the curtain of rain. Zachary stood watching long after she had gone, the cold rain soaking through his clothes to the skin. Only when Sundance nudged his shoulder impatiently did he turn toward town. The Harper's Creek Inn hadn't changed much in 12 years. The same creaking sign hung over the door, though the paint was more faded now. The same smoky lamps lit the small lobby, and the same ancient ledger sat open on the front desk. The only difference was the man behind it, not old Mr. Holloway, but a younger fellow with spectacles and a nervous demeanor. "Room for the night," Zachary said, placing a few coins on the counter. The clerk eyed the marshal's badge on Zachary's vest with apprehension. "We don't get many lawmen passing through, Marshal." "Harper's Creek is a peaceful town. I'm not here on official business," Zachary replied, signing the ledger. "Just passing through." "Of course, sir." The clerk handed him a key. "Room 3, top of the stairs." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window that overlooked the town's main street. Zachary removed his wet clothes, hanging them to dry, and sat on the edge of the bed in his undershirt and trousers. From his saddlebag, he withdrew a small leather pouch. Inside was a tarnished silver locket on a delicate chain. He'd carried it with him all these years, a reminder of what he'd left behind. Inside was a miniature portrait of Hannah at 16, her smile bright and her eyes full of promise. Tomorrow he would explain everything: why he'd left, what he'd seen and done in the years between, and why he believed they could still have a future together. He'd tell her about Green River, about the little house on the edge of town that the council had offered as part of his compensation. He'd explain how a sheriff's life was different from a marshal's, more settled, less dangerous. And if, after hearing it all, she still chose Benjamin Foster and the safe, comfortable life he offered, then Zachary would accept her decision and ride away for good. But not without fighting for her first. Not this time. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the previous night's storm having washed the world clean. Zachary rose early, shaved carefully, and dressed in his best shirt, the one without patches or powder burns. He left his badge in his saddlebag. Today he wasn't Marshal Thompson. He was just Zach, the boy who had loved Hannah Miller since he was old enough to know what love meant. He arrived at the old oak tree 15 minutes early, his stomach knotted with anticipation. The tree had grown in the years since they'd carved their initials into its bark, but the rough heart containing Z+H was still visible, though weathered by time. Zachary traced the carving with his fingertips, remembering the day they'd made it. They had been 17, giddy with first love and the certainty that they would be together forever. How simple everything had seemed then, before the harsh realities of the world had intruded on their dreams. "You're early." He turned to find Hannah standing a few paces away. She wore a different dress today, green with tiny white flowers, more becoming than the practical blue of yesterday. Her hair was arranged more carefully too, though still modestly. She'd made an effort for this meeting, and that gave him hope. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. "Neither was I," she replied honestly, moving to stand beside him under the oak's spreading branches. Her eyes fell on the carving, and a small smile touched her lips. "I'd forgotten about that." "I haven't," Zachary said quietly. "I've thought about this tree, about you every day for 12 years. Hannah's expression grew serious. "You said you wanted to explain. I'm listening." Zachary took a deep breath. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance. He had to make her understand. "The night I left," he began, "I had every intention of coming back for you once I'd established myself. I thought it would take a year, maybe 2. I was young and foolish and had no idea what I was riding into." He told her about his first job as a ranch hand in the New Mexico territory, working for a man who turned out to be running stolen cattle. How he'd been arrested alongside the others, and how a fair-minded marshal had seen something in him worth saving. "Marshal Davis gave me a choice: jail or become his deputy. Said he needed someone who could ride and shoot, and who might be able to see trouble coming because he'd once been part of it." Zachary's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Wasn't much of a choice." He described the years that followed learning the law, tracking outlaws across unforgiving terrain, the constant movement from one trouble spot to another, the gunfights that still haunted his dreams, the men he'd had to kill, the innocent people he'd been too late to save. "I wrote to you," he said softly, 3 times that first year. When I got no reply, I figured you'd moved on, or that your father had intercepted the letters." Hannah's eyes widened in surprise. "I never received any letters, Zach. Not one." A pain that had been buried for years resurfaced. "I sent them, I swear it." "I believe you," she said after a moment, and he could see in her face that she did. "Pa was very angry after you left. He probably did burn them." The confirmation hurt, but it also lifted a weight. She hadn't ignored him. She simply hadn't known he'd tried to reach her. 2 years ago," he continued, "I was tracking a gang that had robbed a bank in Colorado, got caught in a shootout, took a bullet in the shoulder." Unconsciously, his hand moved to touch the spot. "While I was recovering, I had a lot of time to think about my life and what I wanted from it. And all I could think about was you and this town, and how I'd let the most important thing in my life slip away." Hannah's expression softened, but there was still wariness in her eyes. "So you decided to come back?" "Not right away. I knew I couldn't offer you the same uncertain life I'd been living, so I worked towards something more stable. When the Green River offer came, it seemed like a sign." He paused, gathering his courage. "Hannah, I know I hurt you. I know 12 years is a long time, but my feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've grown stronger with time and distance." She turned away, looking out over the creek that had given the town its name. "You can't just walk back into my life and expect everything to be the same, Zach. We're not those children anymore." "I don't want us to be," he said earnestly. "I want us to be who we are now, but together. I've seen enough of the world to know what matters, Hannah, and it's not a badge or a gun or chasing down outlaws. It's having someone to come home to at the end of the day. Someone who knows you, really knows you." Hannah was silent for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was tight with emotion. "Benjamin is a good man. He's kind and steady, and he's never once given me reason to doubt him." He wants to build a life with me here, among people I've known all my life. Do you love him? Zachary asked again, knowing he still had no right to the question but needing to hear her answer. This time Hannah didn't rebuke him. I care for him deeply, she said carefully. He'll be a good husband and father. That's not what I asked. She met his gaze directly. I don't love him the way I loved you, but that kind of love nearly destroyed me when you left, Zach. I'm not sure I can risk that again. Hope and despair warred in his chest. She didn't love Foster, at least not with the all-consuming passion they had once shared. But her fear of being hurt again was a wall between them, one he wasn't sure how to breach. I won't leave again, he promised. Not without you. Green River isn't far, just 2 days' ride. We could visit your parents regularly. And the town has a good doctor. If they ever needed medical care, your father can't get here. He could see her wavering, considering possibilities she had perhaps not allowed herself to contemplate before his return. Hannah. The voice calling from down the path made them both turn. A tall, well-dressed man with thinning brown hair was approaching, his expression shifting from relief to suspicion as he noticed Zachary. Benjamin, Hannah said, and there was no mistaking the guilt in her voice. I didn't expect to see you here. Benjamin Foster came to stand beside Hannah, placing a proprietary hand at the small of her back. Mrs. Howard at the dress shop said she saw you heading this way. I was concerned. His eyes, intelligent and assessing, took in Zachary's appearance. You must be Thompson. Word is you're back in town. Zachary nodded, not bothering to hide his dislike. Foster. The banker's lips pressed into a thin line. I'd heard you'd become a lawman, quite a change from the troublemaker who nearly convinced Hannah to throw away her future. Benjamin, please, Hannah said softly, a flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. It's all right, Hannah, Zachary said, his eyes never leaving Foster's face. Mr. Foster is entitled to his opinion, though I'm not sure he knows as much about our past as he thinks he does. Foster's grip on Hannah tightened slightly. I know enough. I know you broke her heart and left her to face the gossip and pity of the entire town alone. I was here, Thompson. I saw what your selfishness did to her. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Zachary had been young and impulsive, convinced that he needed to make his way in the world before he could offer Hannah the life she deserved. He'd never considered that his leaving might subject her to town gossip. I made mistakes, Zachary acknowledged. I'm trying to make them right. Foster's laugh was short and humorless. By disrupting her life again. Hannah is engaged to be married. We're building a future together. Whatever you and she might have been to each other once, that time is past. Zachary looked to Hannah, waiting for her to speak to contradict Foster's confident assertion. But she remained silent, her eyes downcast, her expression torn. Hannah, Foster said, his voice gentler now, we should go. Your mother is expecting us for lunch, remember? Still, she hesitated. Benjamin, could you give us a moment, please? There are things that need to be said. Foster's jaw tightened, but after a moment he nodded stiffly. 5 minutes, I'll wait by the bridge. He gave Zachary a warning look before walking away, his posture rigid with displeasure. When he was out of earshot, Hannah turned to Zachary, her expression pained. I'm sorry, I didn't want you to meet like this. Are you going to marry him, Hannah? Zachary asked bluntly. She looked away. I gave him my word. Words can be taken back, promises can be unmade. Not by people with honor, she said sharply, then immediately softened. Zach, please try to understand. Benjamin was there when I needed someone. He never pushed, never pressured. He waited years before he even asked to court me properly. He's been patient and kind, and he deserves better than to be abandoned weeks before our wedding. Zachary stepped closer, close enough to smell the lavender in her hair. And what do you deserve, Hannah? A lifetime with a man you respect but don't love. or a chance at something real, even if it comes with risk. Tears shimmered in her eyes. Why did you have to come back now? Why couldn't you have come 5 years ago or never at all? Because fate has a cruel sense of timing, he said softly. But I'm here now, and I'm asking you to choose what your heart wants, not what's safe or expected. She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. I can't do this right now. I need time to think. Time is the one thing we might not have, Hannah. I've been in town less than a day, and already Foster knows I'm here. How long before the whole town is watching us, waiting to see what happens next? Tomorrow, she said suddenly. Meet me at Peterson's Pond tomorrow at sunset. I'll have my answer then. It wasn't what he wanted her to choose him now, to walk away from Foster and the constraints of Harper's Creek without looking back, but it was all she was offering. Tomorrow, he agreed. Then, before he could talk himself out of it, he reached out to brush away the tear on her cheek. The simple touch sent electricity through his fingertips. For what it's worth, I never stopped loving you, not for a single day. Hannah closed her eyes briefly at his touch, then stepped back. I have to go. Benjamin is waiting. Zachary watched her walk away, her green dress bright against the summer grass. She paused briefly when she reached Foster, saying something Zachary couldn't hear. Then the banker placed her hand in the crook of his arm, and they walked together toward town. Zachary remained under the oak tree for a long time afterward, his mind racing with all the things he should have said, all the ways he could have made his case more compelling. But in the end, he knew that words alone wouldn't sway Hannah. She needed to decide for herself what and who she truly wanted. The wait until tomorrow's sunset would be the longest of his life. The Harper's Creek Saloon was not the roughest establishment Zachary had ever entered, but it had its share of hard men and hard drinkers. As he pushed through the swinging doors that evening, a momentary hush fell over the room, followed by the low murmur of recognition passing from table to table. He ignored the stares and made his way to the bar, ordering a whiskey from a barkeep whose weathered face registered no surprise at his appearance. Heard you were back in town, Thompson, the barkeep said, sliding a glass across the scratched wooden surface. Didn't think we'd see you again after all this time. Zachary took a sip of the whiskey, which burned pleasantly on its way down. Just passing through, Jim Doherty had been tending bar at Harper's Creek for as long as anyone could remember. He'd served Zachary his first illegal drink at 16, and had been one of the few to treat him fairly after the incident that had nearly gotten him run out of town for good. Passing through, huh? Jim's skeptical expression made it clear he didn't believe that for a second. Wouldn't have anything to do with a certain schoolteacher who's about to marry the richest man in the county. Zachary gave him a sharp look. Town gossip still travels at the speed of light, I see. Faster, sometimes. Jim leaned in, lowering his voice. Word of advice, son. Hannah Miller has built a good life here. She's respected. The children adore her, and that engagement to Foster, it's been the talk of the town for months. Every detail planned, right down to the flowers she'll carry. Your point? My point is, whatever you're thinking of doing, consider the consequences for her, not just yourself. Jim's eyes, shrewd beneath bushy brows, held Zachary's gaze. You riding back into her life, stirring up old feelings it could cost her everything she's worked for. The words hit harder than Zachary wanted to admit. He hadn't considered the possibility that his return might damage Hannah's standing in the community. In the smaller towns of the West, reputation was everything, especially for a woman. I love her, Jim, he said simply. Always have. The barkeep's expression softened slightly. I know you do, son. Never doubted it. But sometimes loving someone means letting them go. Before Zachary could respond, the saloon doors swung open again, and a group of men entered. At their center was Benjamin Foster, looking out of place in his fine clothes among the dusty ranch hands and laborers who made up the saloon's usual clientele. Foster spotted Zachary immediately, his expression darkening. For a moment, Zachary thought he might turn and leave, but instead the banker squared his shoulders and approached the bar. "Thompson," he said coolly, "I think we need to talk." Zachary raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure we have anything to say to each other." "Oh, I think we do." Foster glanced at the men who had accompanied him, 4 of them, standing awkwardly near the door. In private, perhaps. It had all the markings of a setup, but Zachary was curious enough and confident enough in his ability to handle himself to agree. "Lead the way." Foster nodded toward a door at the back of the saloon that led to a small courtyard used for storage. Once outside, he turned to face Zachary, his expression hard in the fading light. "I'm only going to say this once," Foster began. "Leave Harper's Creek. Tonight. Whatever you and Hannah once meant to each other, it's over. She's made her choice." Zachary crossed his arms, unimpressed by the banker's attempt at intimidation. "Funny, that's not how it seemed this morning. In fact, I'd say Hannah is far from certain about her choice." Anger flashed in Foster's eyes. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Hannah and I have been planning our future for over a year. We're going to build a new house on the north side of town. She's going to continue teaching. We've talked about having children, about growing old together." "These aren't idle dreams, Thompson. They're plans we've made together." "Plans can change," Zachary said evenly, "especially when they're made to please others rather than oneself." Foster took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You think you know her better than I do. You, who abandoned her without a backward glance. I was here, Thompson. I saw what your leaving did to her. I helped her pick up the pieces when you shattered her heart." The accusation struck home, but Zachary refused to show it. "I made mistakes. I'm not denying that. But Hannah and I have unfinished business, and I intend to see it through." "At what cost?" Foster demanded. "Do you have any idea what the gossip would do to her if she broke our engagement now, 3 weeks before the wedding? She'd be ruined in this town. No respectable family would send their children to be taught by a woman who jilted her fiancé for a wandering lawman with a questionable past." It was the same concern Jim had raised, and hearing it from Foster made it impossible to ignore. Zachary had been thinking only of himself and Hannah, of the love they had shared and might share again. He hadn't considered the wider implications for her life in Harper's Creek. Foster seemed to sense his uncertainty and pressed his advantage. "If you truly care for her, you'll leave her in peace. Let her have the stable, respectable life she deserves, not some uncertain future chasing after a man who's already proven he can't be trusted to stay." For a moment, doubt crept into Zachary's resolve. Was he being selfish again? Was he risking Hannah's hard-won place in the community for his own desires? But then he remembered the look in her eyes when she'd asked for time to think, the way she'd leaned into his touch, however briefly. And he remembered her careful words about Foster, that she cared for him, respected him, but had never once mentioned love. "Hannah is a grown woman who can make her own choices," Zachary said firmly. "I won't pressure her, but I won't leave until I've heard her decision from her own lips." Foster's face flushed with anger. "I was hoping to handle this like gentlemen, but you leave me no choice." He glanced over Zachary's shoulder and nodded slightly. Zachary heard the scuff of boots on dirt and turned to find Foster's 4 companions had quietly entered the courtyard. They were rough-looking men, not the sort the banker would normally associate with. "Really, Foster?" Zachary's hand moved casually toward his holster. "Hired muscle. Doesn't seem very gentlemanly to me." Foster stepped back, straightening his vest. "Consider it an escort out of town." These men will see you to the edge of the county line. I suggest you go peacefully." Zachary assessed the situation with the cool detachment that had kept him alive through a dozen similar confrontations. 4 against 1 weren't great odds, but he'd faced worse. And unlike the men eyeing him with eager anticipation, he had no desire to fight. "I don't think so," he said calmly. "I have an appointment tomorrow that I intend to keep." The largest of the men, a bearded giant with hands like ham hocks, stepped forward. "Ain't giving you a choice, Marshal. Mr. Foster here paid good money to see you gone." "Did he now?" Zachary's gaze flicked to Foster, who had the grace to look somewhat embarrassed. "And did he also pay you to assault a federal officer? Because that's what you'd be doing, and the penalty is steep." The men exchanged uncertain glances. Threatening a marshal was a serious offense, one that could land them in a territorial prison for years. "He ain't wearing no badge," one of them muttered. Zachary slowly moved his coat aside to reveal the silver star pinned to his vest. "I don't need to wear it for it to be a crime to interfere with my freedom of movement." The bearded man scowled. "Foster didn't say nothing about you being a real marshal, thought it was just talk." "It's not," Zachary assured him. "Now I suggest you all take Mr. Foster's money and find somewhere else to spend it, because the first man who lays a hand on me is going to regret it. That's a promise." There was a tense moment when it could have gone either way. Then the bearded man spat on the ground and stepped back. "Ain't worth it," he growled. "Come on, boys." The hired muscle filed out of the courtyard, leaving Zachary alone with a fuming Benjamin Foster. "This isn't over," Foster warned. Zachary's smile held no warmth. "On that we agree. But the next time you try to interfere, remember that intimidation and attempted assault are crimes, badge or no badge, and I won't be as forgiving a second time." Foster's jaw worked as he struggled to control his anger. Finally, he straightened his jacket with a sharp tug and moved toward the door. "Enjoy your evening, Marshal. It may be your last in Harper's Creek." After he was gone, Zachary let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The confrontation had been illuminating in ways he hadn't expected. Foster's willingness to resort to underhanded tactics suggested a desperation that went beyond protecting Hannah's reputation. The banker truly feared losing her, and that, more than anything, convinced Zachary that he was right to stay and fight for her. Dawn found Zachary at the small cemetery on the outskirts of town. He stood before a weathered headstone bearing the name Elizabeth Thompson, the morning dew soaking the knees of his trousers as he knelt to clear away the encroaching weeds. "Hello, Ma," he said softly. "It's been a while." His mother had died when he was 14, leaving him in the care of a father who had little time or patience for a rebellious son. Jackson Thompson had been a hard man, made harder by the loss of his wife. He'd expected Zachary to give up school and work the small farm full-time, and had been enraged when the boy had shown more interest in horses and guns than in plowing and planting. By the time Zachary was 16, the tension between father and son had become unbearable. After one particularly vicious argument, Zachary had packed his few belongings and moved into the barn of the Miller farm, where Jacob Miller had grudgingly allowed him to stay in exchange for help with the heavy work. It was during those months that his friendship with Hannah had deepened into something more profound. She had been his confidante, his comfort, and eventually his first love. And when his father had died of pneumonia the following winter, leaving the farm deeply in debt, it had been Hannah who had helped him through his grief and guilt. "I came back for her, Ma," Zachary continued, arranging the wildflowers he had gathered on his way to the cemetery. "I know it took too long. I know I've probably lost any right to her heart, but I had to try." The quiet of the cemetery was broken only by the call of a mourning dove, and the distant sound of a wagon on the main road. It was peaceful here, removed from the complications and conflicts of the town below. "I wish you could have known her better," he said. "You'd have loved her spirit, her kindness. She reminds me of you sometimes in the way she always sees the best in people." He fell silent, lost in memories of a childhood that had been harsh, but not without moments of joy. Many of them centered around the woman buried beneath this stone and the girl who had helped him survive her loss. The sound of approaching footsteps made him look up. To his surprise, Hannah stood a few yards away, a small bouquet of flowers in her hands. "I thought I might find you here," she said, moving forward to place her flowers beside his. "I come sometimes to tend the grave. I knew she meant a lot to you." The simple gesture touched him deeply. "Thank you." Hannah knelt beside him, her skirts pooling around her on the damp grass. "Your father is over there," she said, nodding toward a simpler marker some distance away. "I've tried to look after both graves, but I don't get out here as often as I should." "I've been to see him already," Zachary said. It had been a briefer visit, marked by the complicated feelings he still harbored for the man who had been more taskmaster than father. "I appreciate what you've done, Hannah. It means more than I can say." She nodded, her attention seemingly focused on arranging the flowers just so. "I saw Benjamin this morning," she said after a moment. "He was upset." Zachary tensed. "Did he tell you what happened?" "He said you two had words, that you refused to leave town when he asked you to." She looked up at him, her expression troubled. "He didn't give me details, but I know Benjamin. He can be possessive. Did he threaten you?" "Not in so many words," Zachary hedged, unwilling to cause more problems between Hannah and her fiancé. "We disagreed about my reasons for being in Harper's Creek." Hannah's gaze was searching. "And what exactly are those reasons, Zach? Beyond asking me to run away with you, I mean. What do you really want?" It was the question at the heart of everything, and Zachary knew his answer would determine much of what happened next. "I want a chance to make things right," he said slowly. "I want to show you that I'm not the same reckless boy who left you. I want—" He hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "I want to build a life with you, Hannah. In Green River or here, or wherever you want to be. I want to wake up beside you every morning and go to sleep with you every night. I want to have children with you, watch them grow old together." The naked emotion in his voice surprised even him. These weren't things he had allowed himself to articulate fully, even in the privacy of his own thoughts. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "Zach, I know it's a lot to ask," he said quickly. "I know I'm asking you to give up certainty for possibility. But I love you, Hannah. I never stopped. And I hope that somewhere inside you still feel something for me too." She looked away, but not before he saw the conflict in her eyes. "It's not that simple." "It could be," he insisted gently, "if we both want it to be." Hannah stood abruptly, brushing grass from her skirts. "I need to get to the school. The children will be waiting." Zachary rose as well, careful not to crowd her. "We're still meeting at the pond tonight," she hesitated, then nodded. "Sunset, I'll be there." As she turned to go, Zachary called after her, "Hannah." She paused, looking back at him. "Whatever you decide, know that I meant what I said yesterday. I won't leave without you again. If you choose Foster, I'll accept it and go. But if there's any chance for us, I'll stay and fight for as long as it takes." Something flickered in her expression, fear or hope, he couldn't tell. Then she nodded once and walked away, her slender figure soon disappearing among the gravestones. Zachary remained by his mother's grave a while longer, drawing strength from the connection to his past. Whatever happened tonight, he would need all the strength he could muster. The day passed with excruciating slowness. Zachary spent most of it at the livery stable, tending to Sundance and helping the elderly stable hand, Pete, with tasks that his arthritic hands found difficult. The physical labor was a welcome distraction from the anxiety that grew as sunset approached. By late afternoon, word had spread throughout Harper's Creek that Marshal Thompson and Benjamin Foster had had some sort of confrontation at the saloon. The details varied, with each telling some said they'd fought over Hannah. Others claimed it was an old debt or grudge, but all versions ended with Foster retreating and Zachary standing his ground. The attention made Zachary uncomfortable. He'd never sought the spotlight, preferring to do his job quietly and move on. But in a town this size, privacy was a luxury few could afford, especially when it came to matters of the heart. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Zachary cleaned up as best he could at the stable's water pump, changed into a fresh shirt, and set out for Peterson's Pond. The path took him through the wheat fields where he and Hannah had played as children, past the oak tree where they had carved their initials, and into the small grove of cottonwoods that sheltered the pond from view of the main road. The water was still and golden in the late afternoon light, reflecting the fiery sky above. It was smaller than he remembered, but no less beautiful, with cattails swaying gently along its edges and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. This place held so many memories. It was here that he had first kissed Hannah, both of them awkward and uncertain but filled with the exhilarating discovery of first love. Here they had spent countless summer afternoons swimming and talking and dreaming of the future. And it was here, on the night before he left, that they had made love for the first and only time, their bodies joining under a canopy of stars as they whispered promises that had ultimately been broken. Zachary sat on a fallen log near the water's edge, watching the sun sink lower, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold. As the minutes passed and Hannah didn't appear, doubt began to gnaw at him. Had she changed her mind? Had Foster convinced her not to come? Then he heard the soft rustle of fabric against leaves and turned to see her emerging from the trees, silhouetted against the sunset. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair loose around her shoulders the way he had always loved it. In that moment, she looked so much like the girl he had left behind that his heart ached with the years they had lost. "You came," he said, standing as she approached. "I said I would." Hannah's voice was steady, but he could see the tension in her posture, the way her hands clasped and unclasped nervously at her waist. They stood facing each other as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting dappled patterns on the ground between them. "Have you made your decision?" Zachary asked, afraid of the answer but needing to hear it. Hannah took a deep breath. "I spoke with Benjamin this afternoon. I told him I needed more time before the wedding, that I had doubts that needed to be resolved." Zachary's pulse quickened. "And how did he take it?" "Not well," she admitted. "He was angry, hurt. He accused me of still being in love with you, of having waited for you all these years." "And are you," Zachary asked softly, "still in love with me?" Hannah looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of longing and fear. "I don't know, Zach. When you left, I thought my heart would never heal. For years, I dreamed of you coming back, of us having a second chance. But eventually, I had to let those dreams go to survive." She moved past him to the edge of the pond, where the water lapped gently at the muddy shore. "Benjamin offered me stability, respect. He never pushed, never demanded more than I could give, and over time I grew to care for him deeply." Zachary followed, stopping just behind her. "But you don't love him the way you loved me." She turned to face him, her expression pained. "The way I loved you nearly destroyed me, Zach. I'm not sure I can risk feeling that deeply again. And I'm not sure it would be fair to Benjamin to marry him knowing I could never give him that kind of love." "So where does that leave us?" Zachary asked, hope and dread warring in his chest. Hannah looked out over the water, now darkening as twilight descended. I don't know. I need time to sort through my feelings to decide what I truly want. It wasn't the answer he had hoped for, but it wasn't a rejection either. Zachary took a careful step closer. How much time? I don't know that either, she said with a small, sad smile. This isn't easy, Zach. I have commitments, responsibilities. I can't just walk away from my life here on a whim. It's not a whim, he said firmly. I've spent 12 years becoming someone worthy of you, Hannah. I'm offering you a real future, not just dreams and promises. She studied his face in the fading light. Tell me about Green River. What kind of place is it? What kind of life could we have there? The question gave him hope. She was considering it, at least enough to want details. It's growing fast, he said. The railroad's coming through next year, which means more people, more opportunities. There's a proper church, a school that needs teachers, a doctor who trained back east. The town council's building me a house as part of my compensation, nothing fancy, but solid, with room to expand. He smiled slightly. They're hoping I'll settle down, bring some stability to the sheriff's office. And would you? She asked. Settle down, I mean. No more chasing outlaws across the territory. That's the plan, he affirmed. Green River needs a sheriff who'll be there for the long haul, not just passing through. It would mean regular hours for the most part, home for supper most nights. A normal life. Hannah seemed to be weighing his words carefully. And if I decided not to go with you, would you still take the job? Zachary considered the question. Yes, he said finally. It's a good opportunity and I'm tired of living out of a saddlebag. But it would be a half-life without you, Hannah. A house, not a home. The honesty in his voice seemed to touch her. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing his cheek in a feather-light caress. I need to be sure, Zach, for both our sakes. I can't build a life on regrets and what-ifs. He caught her hand, pressing it more firmly against his face, savoring the warmth of her touch. Take the time you need. I'll wait. A twig snapped loudly in the underbrush, startling them both. Hannah pulled her hand away quickly as Benjamin Foster emerged from the trees, his face contorted with rage. I knew it, he spat, advancing toward them. I knew you were lying when you said you needed time to think. You've already made your choice, haven't you, Hannah? Benjamin, please, Hannah said, stepping forward with her hands raised placatingly. This isn't what it looks like. We were just talking. Foster's laugh was harsh and disbelieving. Talking, with your hands all over each other. Do you think I'm a fool? Zachary moved to put himself between Hannah and the angry banker. That's enough, Foster. You're upset, and you have a right to be, but this isn't the way to handle it. Don't tell me how to handle my fiancé's betrayal, Foster snarled, his normally composed demeanor completely shattered. He turned his attention back to Hannah. All those years I waited patiently, never pushing, giving you the time and space you needed to get over him. And the moment he rides back into town, you're ready to throw everything we've built away. Hannah's face was pale with distress. It's not like that, Benjamin. I care for you deeply. I just need to be sure before we marry. Surely you can understand that. What I understand, Foster said coldly, is that you've been lying to me from the start, that you never intended to get over him, that I was just a convenient replacement until he decided to come back. That's not fair, Hannah protested, tears welling in her eyes. I've never lied to you about my feelings. No, then tell me now, Hannah, straight to my face. Do you love me the way you love him? Foster demanded, his voice breaking slightly on the question. Hannah's silence was answer enough. Foster's face crumpled briefly before hardening into a mask of cold fury. I see, he said. Well, I won't be made a fool of any longer. The engagement is off. You can have him, what's left of him, anyway. The odd phrasing sent a warning prickling up Zachary's spine. What's that supposed to mean, Foster? A smile with no warmth curved the banker's lips. You'll find out soon enough, Marshall. Enjoy your reunion while it lasts. With that cryptic threat, Foster turned and strode back into the trees, leaving Hannah and Zachary staring after him in confusion and alarm. What do you think he meant by that? Hannah asked, a tremor in her voice. Zachary frowned, his instincts as a lawman on high alert. I'm not sure, but I don't like it. Foster doesn't strike me as the type to make idle threats. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the warm evening. He's never been like this before. I've never seen him so angry. Rejection does strange things to a man, Zachary said, still staring in the direction Foster had gone. Especially a man used to getting his way. He turned back to Hannah, noting the distress on her face. Are you all right? She nodded, though she looked far from all right. I didn't want to hurt him. That was never my intention. I know, Zachary said gently, but sometimes hurt is unavoidable, no matter how careful we try to be. Hannah sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I should go back to town. There's going to be talk once word gets out that the engagement is off. I need to speak with my parents before they hear it from someone else. Zachary nodded, understanding her concern. In a small town like Harper's Creek, news, especially scandalous news, traveled fast. I'll walk you home. No, she said quickly. I think it's better if I go alone. Seeing us together now would only add fuel to the gossip. As much as he wanted to protest, Zachary knew she was right. At least let me walk you to the edge of town. It's getting dark. Hannah hesitated, then nodded. All right. Thank you. They walked in silence through the gathering dusk, the weight of Foster's threat and the uncertain future hanging between them. When they reached the outskirts of town, Hannah paused. Zach, about what Benjamin said, be careful. He has influence in this town, connections. If he's truly set on revenge. I can handle Foster, Zachary assured her, though inwardly he was less confident. A man with money and power could cause a lot of trouble, even for a federal marshal. Hannah looked unconvinced. Just promise me you won't do anything reckless. I've lost you once already. I couldn't bear to lose you again, especially not now. The admission, small as it was, kindled hope in Zachary's heart. Does that mean you're considering coming with me to Green River? A small smile touched her lips. It means I'm considering it. It wasn't a yes, but it was far from a no. Zachary returned her smile, resisting the urge to pull her into his arms right there on the edge of town where anyone might see. That's good enough for now, he said. Go talk to your parents. I'll wait to hear from you. Hannah nodded, then surprised him by quickly rising on tiptoes to press a fleeting kiss to his cheek. Be safe, she whispered, then turned and hurried toward the lights of Harper's Creek, her slender figure soon swallowed by the gathering darkness. Zachary watched until she was out of sight, his cheek still warm from her kiss. Then, with a mixture of hope and apprehension, he turned back toward the inn, alert for any sign of trouble that might be brewing in Benjamin Foster's wake. The Harper's Creek Inn was quiet when Zachary returned, the lobby empty save for the nervous clerk who handed over his room key with trembling fingers. Everything all right? Zachary asked, noticing the young man's agitation. Yes, Sir Marshal. Just a busy evening is all. The clerk's eyes darted toward the stairs, then quickly away. Instinct honed by years of dealing with trouble made Zachary pause. Anyone been asking for me? No, sir. The answer came too quickly, the denial too emphatic. Zachary leaned across the counter, lowering his voice. Son, if there's something I should know, now's the time to tell me. The clerk swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thin throat. Mr. Foster came by earlier. He was with Sheriff Donnelly. They went up to your room. Sheriff Donnelly. Zachary had almost forgotten that Harper's Creek had acquired a sheriff in the years since he'd left. The town had been too small for its own lawman back then, relying instead on the county sheriff, who made periodic visits from the larger settlement 20 miles east. Did they say what they wanted? Zachary asked, keeping his voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. The clerk shook his head. No, sir. But they were up there for a while. Sheriff looked mighty serious when they came back down. Zachary nodded his thanks and headed for the stairs, his hand resting casually near his holster. He didn't expect an ambush. Foster was too careful for something so crude, but years on the frontier had taught him never to walk into any situation unprepared. His room appeared undisturbed at first glance. The bed was still made, his saddlebags still hung over the chair where he'd left them. But as he stepped further inside, he noticed that things were slightly out of place. The corner of the rug turned up, his spare shirt folded differently than he'd left it. Someone had searched his belongings, and not particularly carefully. Zachary quickly checked his saddlebags. His spare revolver was still there, as was the small pouch of gold coins he kept for emergencies. But when he reached for the inside pocket where he kept his marshal's commission, his fingers found only empty space. The document was gone. Looking for this. Zachary turned sharply to find a tall, broad-shouldered man standing in the doorway. He wore a tin star on his vest and had the weather-beaten face of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors. In his hand was a folded paper that Zachary recognized as his commission. "Sheriff Donnelly, I presume," Zachary said evenly. "I don't recall giving you permission to go through my things." Donnelly stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "Don't need permission when I have probable cause, Marshal, or should I say former Marshal." Zachary kept his expression neutral despite the sinking feeling in his gut. "What are you talking about?" Donnelly unfolded the commission, holding it up. "Got a telegram from the federal marshal's office in Denver today. Seems they're mighty interested in the whereabouts of one Zachary Thompson, who resigned his position 3 weeks ago. Said he turned in his badge and everything." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Yet here you are, still wearing a marshal's star and flashing this commission around town." It was a complication Zachary hadn't anticipated. He had resigned, technically speaking, when he'd accepted the Green River offer. But the paperwork was still being processed, and his superior had told him to keep his badge until the new appointment was finalized. "There's an explanation," Zachary began. "I'm sure there is," Donnelly cut him off. "And you can give it to the judge when he comes through next week. Until then, I'm confiscating this." He tucked the commission into his coat pocket. "And I'll be taking that badge too." Zachary didn't move. "On what charge, Sheriff?" "Impersonating a federal officer for starters. Mr. Foster also mentioned something about threats and intimidation. Says you've been harassing his fiancé." "That's a lie," Zachary said, anger beginning to simmer beneath his calm exterior. "Hannah can confirm it." "Miss Miller seems to be at the center of this mess," Donnelly observed. "Mr. Foster has quite a different version of events than what you're suggesting. Says you came back to town with the deliberate intention of disrupting his upcoming wedding. Says you've been filling Miss Miller's head with false promises, trying to lure her away." "Hannah is a grown woman who can make her own decisions," Zachary replied. "And from what I understand, the engagement has been called off." Something like surprise flickered across Donnelly's face, quickly masked. "That's so. Well, doesn't change the fact that you've been representing yourself as a federal marshal when you're not. Badge Thompson. Now." Zachary weighed his options. He could refuse, possibly force a confrontation that would only make things worse. Or he could comply, bide his time, and sort this out properly. With deliberate slowness, he unpinned the silver star from his vest and held it out. I'll want a receipt for this, and for my commission." Donnelly took the badge, tucking it into the same pocket as the commission. "You'll get one. Along with some advice, leave Harper's Creek first thing tomorrow. Whatever's between you and Miss Miller, it's causing trouble in my town. Trouble I don't need." "Is that an official order, Sheriff?" Zachary asked, his voice deceptively mild. "Consider it a friendly suggestion," Donnelly replied. "One that could save you a night in my jail." The threat was clear, but so was the fact that Donnelly wasn't actually arresting him, at least not yet. Which meant that Foster's influence only stretched so far. A small advantage, but Zachary would take what he could get. "I appreciate your concern," he said, "but I have business in Harper's Creek that isn't finished yet." Donnelly studied him for a long moment, his weathered face giving away nothing. "Your funeral," he said finally. "But know this, I'll be watching you, Thompson. One step out of line and you'll be seeing the inside of a cell until that judge arrives." With that warning delivered, the sheriff turned and left, closing the door firmly behind him. Zachary sat heavily on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair in frustration. Foster was moving faster than expected, using his connections to undermine Zachary's position and credibility. Without his badge and commission, he had no official standing, no authority beyond that of any ordinary citizen. It was a clever move. But Foster had overlooked one crucial detail: Zachary had never relied solely on his badge to handle difficult situations. Long before he'd pinned on a star, he'd learned to use his wits, his courage, and when necessary, his fists and gun. And he had one advantage: Foster couldn't counter Hannah's growing certainty about her own heart. The real question was what Foster would try next, and how far he was willing to go to exact his revenge. Zachary didn't have to wait long for an answer. Shortly after dawn, a hesitant knock on his door roused him from a fitful sleep. Opening it cautiously, he found Hannah's younger brother, Michael, shifting nervously in the hallway. At 20, Michael Miller was a lanky young man with his sister's chestnut hair and earnest expression. He'd been just a boy when Zachary left town, but now stood eye to eye with him, though without the hardened muscle that years of physical work had given the former marshal. "Michael," Zachary said, surprised. "What brings you here so early?" "Hannah sent me," Michael replied, keeping his voice low. "She needs to see you right away. Said to meet her at the old Peterson barn out past the fields." Alarm prickled along Zachary's spine. "Is she all right?" Michael glanced over his shoulder nervously. "She's fine, but things in town are tense. Foster's been telling anyone who'll listen that you seduced Hannah away from him, that you're no longer a marshal but a wanted man pretending to be one. Some folks are believing him." It was worse than Zachary had anticipated. Foster was moving to turn the town against him, isolating him from potential allies. "Thank you for coming, Michael. Tell Hannah I'll be there within the hour." The young man nodded, then hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you're back." Hannah was never really happy with Foster, no matter what she told herself. "Ma and Pa couldn't see it, but I could." The unexpected support caught Zachary off guard. "That means a lot, Michael. Thank you." As the young man hurried away, Zachary quickly dressed and gathered his essentials. If the mood in town was turning against him, it might be wise to check out of the inn and keep Sundance saddled and ready, just in case a hasty departure became necessary. The Peterson barn stood on the far edge of the wheat fields, a weathered structure that had once been part of a thriving farm. Old man Peterson had died years ago. According to town gossip, Zachary had overheard, and his children had sold the land but kept the homestead and barn, though both had fallen into disrepair. Zachary approached cautiously, alert for any sign of a trap. But the area around the barn appeared deserted, with only a few chickens scratching in the dirt to suggest any recent human presence. "Hannah," he called softly as he entered the dim interior, the smell of old hay and dust filling his nostrils. "Up here." Her voice came from the hayloft above. Zachary climbed the rickety ladder, finding Hannah seated on a bale of hay near a small window that allowed the morning light to filter through. She looked tired, with shadows under her eyes suggesting she'd slept as poorly as he had. "I'm sorry for the secrecy," she said as he settled beside her. "But after last night, I didn't think it was safe to meet in town." "What happened after you got home?" he asked. Hannah sighed, twisting a strand of hair around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. "Benjamin was waiting at my parents' house. He'd already told them the engagement was off, that you had coerced me somehow. Pa was furious. Ma was crying. It was awful." Zachary's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry you had to face that alone. It gets worse," she continued. "Benjamin has apparently been busy all night. He's been to see Sheriff Donnelly, the mayor, even Reverend White. He's telling everyone you're a fraud, that you're wanted in several territories, that you came back specifically to ruin his life because of some old grudge. And people are believing him." Zachary asked, though he already knew the answer. Hannah nodded sadly. "Benjamin is respected in Harper's Creek. He's helped a lot of people over the years, extended loans when crops failed, contributed to the church building fund, sponsored the town picnic. His word carries weight." "And what about your word?" Zachary asked. "Surely people who have known you all your life won't believe you could be so easily manipulated." "Some don't," she acknowledged. "Michael is on our side, obviously. And Mrs. Patterson at the general store, she's always thought Benjamin was too rigid for me. But others—" She trailed off, her expression troubled. "People are quick to believe the worst, especially about a woman who breaks an engagement so close to the wedding." Zachary took her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I never meant to bring this kind of trouble down on you, Hannah. Maybe it would be better if I left, at least for now." "No." The vehemence in her voice surprised them both. Hannah colored slightly but continued. "That's exactly what Benjamin wants, to drive you away, to isolate me until I have no choice but to come crawling back to him." "You think that's his plan?" "I know it is," she said grimly. "He as much as told me so last night when he came to my parents' house. He said once you were gone, I'd realize my mistake and beg him to take me back, that he might be persuaded to forgive me given time." Anger flared hot in Zachary's chest. "And if you don't beg?" Hannah's expression hardened. "Then he'll make sure everyone in Harper's Creek knows I'm a woman of loose morals who threw away a respectable match for a disgraced lawman. My position at the school would be at risk. My family's standing in the community would suffer." It was a calculated, cruel strategy, one that revealed a side of Benjamin Foster that Hannah had clearly never seen before. "He can't get away with this," Zachary said. "There must be someone in town with enough influence to counter his." Hannah shook her head. "Benjamin owns the bank, Zach. Half the businesses in town owe him money. The other half rely on his goodwill for loans to expand or survive bad seasons. Even the mayor has a mortgage that Benjamin holds." The situation was more dire than Zachary had realized. Foster had spent years building his power base in Harper's Creek, creating a network of obligation and dependency that gave him near complete control. "Then we need to leave," Zachary said decisively. "Today. We can be in Green River by tomorrow night. Start fresh where Foster has no influence." Hannah's eyes widened. "Just like that? Leave everything behind?" "What choice do we have?" Zachary asked gently. "Foster has made it clear he intends to destroy both of us if we stay. At least in Green River, we'd have a chance to build something new without his shadow hanging over us." Hannah was silent for a long moment, her expression conflicted. What about my parents, my brother, my students? I can't just abandon them. Your parents will understand in time, Zachary said, though he was less certain about Jacob Miller, who had never approved of him. Michael already supports us. And as for your students, there are children in Green River who need a teacher just as much. He could see her wavering, torn between the life she knew and the uncertain future he was offering. It's not an easy decision, I know. But Hannah, this is what I came back for, to ask you to run away with me again. Only this time I promise I won't leave you behind. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm scared, Zach. Not of leaving exactly, but of making the wrong choice, of regretting it later. He squeezed her hand gently. What does your heart tell you? Hannah closed her eyes, a tear spilling down her cheek. That I've never stopped loving you. That despite everything, despite the years and the pain and the life I've built here, you're still the one I dream about at night. The simple confession, spoken in a voice thick with emotion, struck Zachary to his core. Then let's go, he said softly. Today, now, before Foster can cause any more damage. Hannah opened her eyes, and in them he saw a determination that hadn't been there before. All right, she said. But I need to do something first. Before Zachary could ask what she meant, she leaned forward and kissed him. It was a tentative kiss at first, as if she were relearning the shape of his mouth after all these years. Then, as the familiar connection sparked between them, it deepened into something more urgent, more certain. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their foreheads pressed together in the dusty light of the hayloft. I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing in our field, Hannah confessed, her voice a whisper. Zachary smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in 12 long years. Was it worth the wait? Yes, she said simply. But let's not wait another 12 years for the next one. The moment of joy was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Hannah tensed, moving to the small window to peer out cautiously. It's Benjamin, she whispered, her face paling. And Sheriff Donnelly. And, oh no, that's my father with them. Zachary joined her at the window. Sure enough, 3 riders were approaching the barn, Foster in the lead, followed by Donnelly and Jacob Miller, the latter looking grim and determined despite the obvious pain his bad leg was causing him on horseback. How did they know we were here? Hannah wondered aloud. A sick feeling settled in Zachary's stomach. Michael, did you tell him our plans? Hannah's eyes widened in realization. I told him I might be leaving with you, that I needed to gather some things from home first. You don't think? That he told your father? It's possible. He might have thought he was protecting you. Or Foster had intercepted Michael on his way back to town and coerced the information out of him. Either way, they had lost the element of surprise. We need to go, Zachary said, scanning the barn for another exit. Is there a back way out of here? Hannah nodded. There's a small door on the far side behind those old stalls. It leads to the creek path. Good, get your horse ready. I'll try to buy us some time. Hannah caught his arm. Zach, they're armed. I saw the sheriff checking his pistol, and my father had his rifle. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Zachary had no desire to engage in a gunfight with Hannah's father and the town sheriff, but neither was he willing to surrender to Foster's machinations. Trust me, he said, pressing a quick kiss to her forehead. I'll meet you by the creek in 5 minutes. If I'm not there by then, ride for Green River. I'll find you. Reluctantly, Hannah nodded and hurried toward the rear of the barn where their horses were tethered. Zachary checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded, then descended the ladder to the main floor of the barn just as the large double doors swung open. Thompson, Foster's voice rang out, harsh with triumph. We know you're in here, and we know Hannah's with you. Come out now, and maybe the sheriff won't have to use those shackles he brought along. Zachary stepped forward into the shaft of sunlight streaming through the doors, his hands deliberately away from his holster. "Morning, gentlemen. This is private property, if I'm not mistaken. Doesn't seem right to come barging in uninvited." Foster's face twisted with dislike. "Where is she?" "Not here," Zachary lied smoothly. "I came to check on something she left for me." Jacob Miller urged his horse forward, his weathered face creased with anger and worry. "Don't lie to us, boy. My daughter was seen leaving town in this direction early this morning. Now where is she?" The genuine concern in the older man's voice gave Zachary pause. Whatever else might be said about Jacob Miller, he loved his daughter and wanted to protect her. "Mr. Miller," Zachary said, addressing him directly, "I understand your concern, but Hannah is a grown woman making her own choices. She doesn't need to be hunted down like a runaway child." "What she needs," Foster interjected coldly, "is to be protected from men who would take advantage of her kind heart. Men like you, Thompson." Sheriff Donnelly, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "This doesn't have to get ugly. Just tell us where Miss Miller is, and we can all go back to town and sort this out civilly." Zachary doubted very much that anything would be sorted civilly once Foster had Hannah isolated again. "I appreciate the offer, Sheriff, but as I said, Hannah isn't here. And even if she were, I wouldn't hand her over to a man who's threatening her reputation and livelihood out of wounded pride." Foster's face flushed with anger. "How dare you? I've done nothing but try to protect Hannah from your lies and manipulation. Everyone in town knows you're a fraud, Thompson, a disgraced marshal who came back to seduce away another man's fiancé." "Is that what happened?" Zachary asked mildly. "Or did you lose her because she realized she didn't love you the way a woman should love the man she's going to marry?" The barb struck home. Foster's hand moved toward the pocket of his fine coat, and for a moment Zachary thought he was reaching for a concealed weapon. Instead, he withdrew a folded paper. "Sheriff," Foster said, his voice tight with suppressed rage, "I believe now would be a good time to serve that warrant." Donnelly hesitated, glancing between Foster and Zachary with an expression that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with his role in this confrontation. "Mr. Foster, I'm not sure this is the right serve the warrant, Sheriff," Foster cut him off. "Or I'll have to question your fitness for office at the next town council meeting." The threat was clear and effective. Donnelly's expression hardened as he took the paper from Foster and unfolded it. "Zachary Thompson," he read formally, "you are hereby charged with impersonating a federal officer, intimidation, and attempted abduction of Miss Hannah Miller. You are ordered to surrender yourself to the custody of the Harper's Creek Sheriff's Office to await trial." Abduction. The charge was absurd but dangerous. In this territory, abduction could carry a sentence of 10 years or more in prison, depending on the circumstances. "That's a lie," Zachary said evenly. "Hannah came to me of her own free will. Ask her yourself." "We intend to," Foster replied, "once you tell us where she is." The standoff was interrupted by the sound of galloping hooves approaching from the direction of town. All heads turned as Michael Miller rode into view, his horse lathered with exertion. "Pa," he called as he reined in sharply. "Pa, you have to stop this. Hannah left town of her own free will. She loves Zachary, she always has." Jacob Miller's face darkened with anger. "Stay out of this, Michael. You don't understand what's happening." "I understand better than you think," the young man replied hotly. "I understand that Hannah was never happy with Foster, that she was only marrying him because she thought Zach was never coming back. I understand that Foster is trying to destroy them both because he can't stand to lose." Foster's composed facade cracked slightly. "This is absurd." The boy is clearly confused, influenced by Thompson's lies just as Hannah has been. The only liar here is you, Foster, Michael shot back. Tell them about the threats you made. Tell them how you said you'd ruin Hannah's reputation if she didn't come back to you. Tell them how you said you'd make sure she never taught in this county again. A heavy silence fell over the group. Jacob Miller turned slowly to look at Foster, his expression changing from anger to confusion. "Is this true, Benjamin?" he asked. "Did you threaten my daughter?" Foster's composure slipped further. "Jacob, you can't possibly believe this nonsense. The boy is clearly—" "I asked you a simple question," Miller interrupted, his voice hard. "Did you threaten my daughter?" Foster's hesitation was answer enough. Jacob Miller's face hardened with a new understanding. "I think we're done here," he said coldly. "Sheriff, I'm withdrawing any complaint against Thompson on behalf of my family. What my daughter does with her heart is her business, not ours." Donnelly looked relieved at the excuse to back down. "Mr. Foster, without the Miller family's cooperation, these charges won't stand up. I'm afraid I can't execute this warrant." Foster's face contorted with rage. "This is outrageous. You can't possibly—" He was interrupted by the sound of the barn's rear door opening. Hannah stood there, leading both her horse and Sundance, her expression a mixture of determination and apprehension. "Hannah," her father said, his voice softening. "Child, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Pa," she replied, moving to stand beside Zachary. "And Michael is telling the truth. Benjamin threatened to ruin me if I didn't return to him. He said he'd make sure no one in Harper's Creek would ever trust or respect me again." Foster's careful mask of respectability shattered completely. "You ungrateful," he sputtered, then collected himself with visible effort. "Fine. Go with him. See if I care. But don't come crawling back to me when he abandons you again, when you're stranded in some frontier hellhole with no money and no friends." "That won't happen," Zachary said quietly, taking Hannah's hand in his. "Not this time." Jacob Miller dismounted awkwardly, his bad leg causing him to wince as he approached his daughter. For a moment, Zachary thought the older man might try to physically separate them. Instead, he stopped a few paces away, his weathered face softening as he looked at Hannah. "Are you sure about this, girl?" he asked gently. "Riding off with him, leaving everything behind." Hannah squeezed Zachary's hand. "I'm sure, Pa, I love him. I always have." Miller sighed heavily, the sound of a man confronting a truth he'd long tried to deny. "Your mother won't like it. She had her heart set on that church wedding." "Tell her I'm sorry," Hannah said, tears welling in her eyes. "Tell her I'll write as soon as we're settled." Miller nodded, then turned his attention to Zachary, his expression hardening again. "If you hurt her, if you leave her again, there isn't a place in this territory where you'll be safe from me. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Zachary replied solemnly, "but it won't come to that, I promise you." For a long moment, the two men regarded each other, years of mistrust and resentment hanging between them. Then, to Zachary's surprise, Miller extended his hand. "See that it doesn't," he said gruffly as Zachary shook his hand. "And take care of my girl." Foster, watching this exchange with increasing fury, finally lost what remained of his composure. "This is insanity, all of you listening to this. This criminal, he's manipulating you, can't you see? Sheriff, are you going to stand by and do nothing while he steals away a respectable woman from our community?" Donnelly, who had been observing the scene with growing discomfort, finally dismounted and approached Foster. "Mr. Foster, I think it's time we headed back to town. There's nothing more to be done here." "Nothing to be done." Foster's voice rose to a near shout. "He's a wanted man, a fraud. You have a duty to arrest him, based on what evidence?" Donnelly countered. "The charges you've brought are clearly motivated by personal grievance, not actual wrongdoing. And without the Miller family's cooperation, they'll never stand up in court." Foster's hand plunged into his coat pocket and emerged holding a small revolver. "If you won't do your duty, I'll do it for you." Everything happened at once. Donnelly lunged for Foster's arm, Michael shouted a warning, and Zachary pushed Hannah behind him, reaching for his own weapon. But it was Jacob Miller who moved fastest, despite his bad leg. With surprising agility, he stepped between Foster and Zachary, knocking the banker's arm upward just as the revolver discharged. The shot went wild, harmlessly into the rafters of the barn. In the ensuing chaos, Donnelly wrestled the gun from Foster's hand while Michael helped his father, who had stumbled from the exertion. "Benjamin Foster," Donnelly said grimly, securing the banker's hands behind his back with a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest for attempted murder and assault with a deadly weapon." Foster seemed to collapse in on himself, his rage giving way to stunned disbelief. "This isn't happening," he muttered. "This can't be happening." "Oh, it's happening all right," Donnelly assured him, guiding him toward the horses. "And I suspect once word gets around town about what you tried to do here today, your position at the bank might be in jeopardy as well." As the sheriff led Foster away, Hannah rushed to her father's side. "Pa, are you hurt?" Miller shook his head, though he was leaning heavily on Michael for support. "Just twisted my bad leg a bit, nothing serious." Hannah embraced him tightly. "Thank you for understanding, for standing up for me." Miller returned the embrace awkwardly, patting her back. "You're my daughter, Hannah. Your happiness matters more to me than anything else." He glanced at Zachary over her shoulder. "Even if it means accepting choices I might not have made for you." It was as close to a blessing as they were likely to get from Jacob Miller, and Zachary accepted it with a grateful nod. "We should get Pa home," Michael said. "Ma will be worried sick by now." Hannah released her father reluctantly. "Will you tell her everything, make her understand?" "I'll try," Miller promised. "Though you know your mother, she'll fret regardless. Be sure to write as soon as you're settled, it'll ease her mind." "I will," Hannah assured him. "And maybe once we're established in Green River, you and Ma could visit. There's a good doctor there who might be able to help with your leg." Miller's expression softened. "We'll see. Now go on, before that banker finds some other way to cause trouble. The territorial prison won't hold him forever." With a final embrace for her father and brother, Hannah turned to Zachary, her eyes bright with unshed tears and something else, hope perhaps, or the excitement of new beginnings. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, reaching for his hand. "Ready." They mounted their horses under the watchful eyes of Hannah's family. As they rode out of the barn into the bright summer morning, Zachary felt a lightness in his heart that had been absent for 12 long years. "Green River?" he asked, glancing at the woman beside him, the woman who had always been his true north, even when he'd lost his way. Hannah smiled, the sun catching in her chestnut hair and turning it to fire. "Green River," she confirmed. "And this time we run away together." The journey to Green River took 2 days, winding through golden plains and rolling hills dotted with wildflowers. They camped the first night beside a small stream, cooking the trout Zachary caught over an open fire and talking long into the night, sharing the stories of their years apart, rebuilding the connection that time and distance had strained but never broken. As they rode into Green River on the evening of the second day, Hannah gasped at the sight of the bustling frontier town. It was larger than Harper's Creek, with a proper main street lined with wooden sidewalks, a 2-story schoolhouse, and even a small theater advertising weekly performances. "It's beautiful," she said, taking in the town that would be their new home. Zachary smiled, seeing it through her eyes, not just the dusty streets and wooden buildings, but the possibility of it all, the future they could build here together. "Wait until you see the house," he said. guiding Sundance toward the northern edge of town, where a neat white cottage stood on a small rise, overlooking both the town and the river that gave it its name. It was simple but solid, with a covered porch running along the front and bright curtains visible through the windows. As they approached, the front door opened and a gray-haired woman stepped out, waving enthusiastically. "Sheriff Thompson," she called. "We'd almost given up on you." Zachary dismounted, helping Hannah down from her horse. "Mrs. Reynolds," he greeted the woman warmly. "I apologize for the delay. There were complications." Mrs. Reynolds, the mayor's wife and self-appointed welcoming committee for Green River, beamed at them. "So I see," she said, her eyes twinkling as they fell on Hannah. "And who might this lovely young lady be?" "Hannah Miller," Zachary introduced, his arm slipping around Hannah's waist. "Soon to be Hannah Thompson, if she'll have me." Hannah's surprised gasp was followed by a radiant smile. "Is that a proposal, Zachary Thompson?" He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I suppose it is. Not very romantic, I'm afraid. I should have waited, done it properly with a ring," and Hannah silenced him with a kiss, heedless of Mrs. Reynolds's delighted gasp. "Yes," she said when they broke apart. "The answer is yes." Mrs. Reynolds clapped her hands in excitement. "Oh, how wonderful! The town will be so pleased. We've been hoping our new sheriff would bring a wife. It adds stability, you know, and we're in desperate need of another teacher for the school. The children have outgrown poor Mr. Harrison's ability to manage them all." Hannah's eyes lit up at the mention of teaching. "I'd be happy to help with the school," she said eagerly. "I was a teacher in Harper's Creek." "Perfect," Mrs. Reynolds exclaimed. "Simply perfect. Now, I've taken the liberty of preparing the house for your arrival, Sheriff. There's food in the pantry, fresh linens on the beds, and flowers in the parlor. The town council will want to meet with you tomorrow to finalize your appointment, but tonight you should rest after your journey." With a knowing smile and a wink at Hannah that brought a blush to her cheeks, Mrs. Reynolds took her leave, promising to return in the morning to give Hannah a proper tour of the town. Alone at last, Zachary and Hannah stood hand in hand before the house that would be their home. "What do you think?" he asked, suddenly nervous. "It's not grand, but there's room to expand, and the land behind it goes all the way to the river. We could plant a garden, maybe build a proper stable eventually." Hannah squeezed his hand. "It's perfect, Zach, more than I ever dreamed of." He led her up the steps and across the porch, then paused at the threshold. "I believe there's a tradition about carrying the bride over the doorstep," he said with a smile. "But since we're not married yet—" Before he could finish the thought, Hannah found herself swept up into his arms, laughing as he carried her through the doorway into their new home. "Welcome home, Hannah," he said softly, setting her down in the small but cozy parlor where a vase of wildflowers brightened a polished table. "Home," she repeated, the word filled with wonder and promise. "I like the sound of that." As the sun set over Green River, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zachary Thompson finally found the peace that had eluded him for 12 long years. In the fields of their childhood, he had asked Hannah to run away with him again. But this time, they weren't running away from anything. They were running toward a future together. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn day with leaves turning gold and red along the river, Hannah Miller became Hannah Thompson in a simple ceremony in Green River's small church. The entire town turned out for the occasion, along with a few special guests from Harper's Creek, Hannah's parents, her brother Michael, and to everyone's surprise, Jim Doherty, the old barkeep who had always treated Zachary fairly. Jacob Miller, his leg much improved after treatment from Green River's doctor, walked his daughter down the aisle with only the slightest limp. When the Reverend asked who gave this woman to be married, he answered in a clear, strong voice, "Her mother and I do." And for the first time, Zachary saw complete acceptance in the older man's eyes as he placed Hannah's hand in his. As husband and wife shared their first kiss to the cheers and applause of their new community, both knew with absolute certainty that the long, winding path that had led them apart and back together again had been worth every step. In the years that followed, Green River prospered, growing from a frontier outpost to a thriving town as the railroad brought new settlers and opportunities. Sheriff Zachary Thompson became known throughout the territory for his fair but firm enforcement of the law, while Hannah Thompson transformed the town's small schoolhouse into one of the finest educational establishments in the region. They had children, 3 of them, 2 boys and a girl who inherited their mother's chestnut hair and their father's determination. They built onto their little house on the hill, adding rooms as their family grew, planting the garden they had dreamed of, and eventually constructing the stable where their children learned to ride on the descendants of faithful Sundance. And on summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were tucked safely in bed, Zachary and Hannah would often sit on their porch, watching the sun set over the river that had given their home its name. In those quiet moments, with her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist, they would sometimes speak of Harper's Creek, of the fields where they had run as children, and of the long journey that had finally brought them home to each other. It had taken 12 years, countless miles, and more than a few heartaches, but as Hannah had once said, standing in the doorway of their little house on that first evening in Green River, some things were worth waiting for. And sometimes, the best journeys are the ones that bring you back to where you began, but with new eyes to see what was there all along.